it's good for you to evaluate exactly where your team is. And for some teams, they're a lot further than they want to be. And for other teams, they're not as far as you think. That is kind of where the Clippers and Mavericks sit. Now, obviously, again, I have not seen game one of the Mavericks Thunder series, but both of these teams, I would say halfway through the season, both of these teams had two completely different looks. And both of these teams had two completely different ideas about themselves. Now, yes, every team hopes to be in contention for a championship. And when you have players as good as Luka Doncic, when you have players as good as Kyrie Irving, you hope to be in that championship conversation. But there was a little less certainty about the Dallas Mavericks competing for a championship than there was the LA Clippers. When you get a Kawhi Leonard, or when you have Kawhi Leonard, when you have Paul George, when you get a James Harden, when you have Russell Westbrook, you know what all four of them have in common? They will be eventually in the Hall of Fame. I don't care what people feel about Paul George. I know that there's some people that love Paul George. There's some people that hate Paul George. Hey, you have the right to feel how you feel. But if we're talking subjectively, Paul George he is good enough to be in the Hall of Fame. When you have four Hall of Famers, your expectation for yourself should be high. They don't go get James Harden from Philly if they didn't think that he would be the piece, or he could be the piece that unlocks a team that up to this point has not reached the goals that they hope to have reached with the type of players that they have. Well, as we sit here today, one team, the Dallas Mavericks, would have just played the Oklahoma City Thunder, who was the number one overall seed in the West. They would have played them in game one of the second round. And another team, the other team, the LA Clippers, are in the reevaluation process at home. The question is, when do you decide to break something up? When should a team that has as many pieces as they have, when should they decide to break it up? If they should decide to break it up. That is the reevaluation process that is taking place. What should we do next? Because I'm almost sure that the brass that call themselves the higher-ups for the Clippers did not expect to be here. Did not expect to be watching the playoffs the same way fans are watching the playoffs in round 2. I do think it's extremely interesting that 3 teams that we kind of touted as the next best teams, or the quote-unquote super teams, that is the that is the Phoenix Suns, that's the Milwaukee Bucks, and this Clippers team, all of them did not even touch the second round. Decisions need to be made. Decisions are going to be made. One of the reasons why I said that it's going to be a very bleak, it's going to be a very nasty future for this current Suns team is because you spend that much money on your top three players, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker. You spend all that money on them, meaning that you have to gut pretty much your entire team for those three players. And you hope that those three players, because you spent so much money, will take you to the promised land. Not only did they not do that, they didn't even win you a game. So now you pretty much gambled with your future, giving up as many picks as you gave up for Kevin Durant and for Bradley Beal. And now you have no picks for the foreseeable future. And you have three very expensive players that do the same exact thing. Their skill sets are extremely redundant. So you're not really building a team. You're building a rec center team. You're building a team that you would pick up at the park and just figure it out. Well, those teams are fun when they're fun, but those teams aren't championship teams. I'm not going to lie and say that I had high hopes for the Clippers this year. I am one of those people. Call me naive, call me stupid, call me what you want. I'm one of those people that do not bank on injuries. I'm one of those people that have, I guess, the optimism that a player is going to be able to play. Yes, I do acknowledge that some players have a more extensive history of injury, but I do hope and I do bank on the fact, outside of maybe Ben Simmons. I know he just caught a stray, but I never really expect Ben Simmons to be healthy because he hasn't been since Philly. I understand how important, and I've said this on this podcast for the last few episodes now, I understand how important your best player is to a team's success. It's almost unheard of that a team that does not have their best player due to injury makes a extensive run in the playoffs. The Clippers is probably the only team that the expectation should be a little different for them because they have, even with Kawhi Leonard being out, they have 3 Hall of Famers. And they have an incredible coach in Ty Lue. And they have a well-built team. Whether you talk about Zubac, whether you talk about Norman Powell, whether you talk about Mason Plumlee, whether you talk about Coffee, with Terrence Mann, they have a good team. And what's different from them and the Suns outside of the team construction, their stars aren't redundant. Meaning, while yes, they do similar things, they can also do different things. Which is why, to me, this loss is so baffling. I give all the credit to, obviously, the Mavericks for overcoming, the Clippers. And you looked in that series, and this team, which is the Dallas Mavericks, feeds so heavily off of the play of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. They don't really have another player that can really go get their own, that can really put the ball in the ground and get their shot. Almost everything runs through both Luka or Kyrie Irving. And I will say that defensively, they were incredible with Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively. They were great. Even Luka, who I have even lamented his defense could be better. Luka was incredible in this series. So in all respects, the Dallas Mavericks won this series. I mean, hell, they won 4-2. So it ain't like it wasn't as close as you think. It wasn't. It was. I know it was 6 games instead of 7, but this is a very, I'll say, tough time for the evaluation period for the Clippers. Because one thing about the evaluation period, it is always going to come, but sometimes it comes sooner than you expect. And I'm almost sure that the Clippers, especially when they got James Harden, did not expect to be out round 1. And I even said before this series, it would be very hard for me to look up next season and see this team fully intact, because you have to ask yourself, what is the ceiling? I think that's the hardest part about the reevaluation period. The team thought that the ceiling was different than what it really is. When you have 4 Hall of Famers, you would think that the ceiling is NBA championship. You go into it as you know how I say that every team has different expectations coming into the seasons? When you have 4 Hall of Famers suited up, you would think that the expectation is championship. Having 2 Hall of Famers, having 1 Hall of Famer. Hell, why do you think that there's still people that have not given up on the Golden State Warriors, even with how bad they look these last 2 years? Because they have an all-time player in Steph Curry. And it's very hard to give up on a player or a future Hall of Famer, an all-time player. The Clippers thought that they have 4 of them. And they can't make it out the first round. So obviously the ceiling that they thought was championship, obviously is not that. No one wants to talk about it, but it's true, and it has to be talked about. At this point of his career, we are leaning back more than we're looking forward when talking about Kawhi Leonard. This is yet another year where Kawhi Leonard is not available in the most important time for his team, and that is the playoffs. He played 2 games, I think. In both games they lost because of how much time he missed. Now, I am not saying that Kawhi Leonard is not hurt. I'm not saying that he's faking injury. I'm not saying any of that. What I am saying is I think that this Clippers experiment with with Kawhi Leonard being your best player, this experiment, this case study has shown that I think that the Toronto Raptors year was more of an anomaly than the norm. Now, yes, I am one of those people that think if Golden State was completely healthy in the finals, they would have won. But it is what it is. But I don't think Kawhi Leonard, because of his extensive injury history at this point, I don't think Kawhi Leonard can be your best player and you still have championship aspirations. He maybe could have. And I understand, again, what happened with the Toronto Raptors. But mind you, remember that road. Game 7. There's no doubt in my mind that Kawhi Leonard is a great player when healthy. There's no doubt in my mind that Kawhi Leonard can be the best player on a championship caliber team. We have seen it. But we've also seen more times than we've seen the latter or the former is Kawhi Leonard not be available for his team in the biggest moments. So now you're putting pressure on players that are good enough to hold that pressure, i.e. Paul George, but has already come out and said that he's fine taking a second option role. So that case, there's no way that Paul George could be your best player. Hell, we've even seen Paul George be the best player on the team, and while he was good in Indiana, there was an obvious ceiling, and that ceiling was LeBron James in the Eastern Conference Finals going against Miami. I'm not saying that. I mean, I know Kawhi Leonard just signed the extension, so I'm not saying Kawhi Leonard's going to be gone. But it's very hard for me to see Paul George on this team starting next year. And I'm very interested to see what happens with James Harden, because both of them, and Russell Westbrook. Because again, at some point you have to be honest about what we're seeing, and at some point you have to be honest with yourself. I understand that you may think your ceiling is here. And in all honesty, your ceiling should be here. But when you look at what you've produced, your ceiling is where it is. And this is yet another season where you're asking more questions than receiving answers. Again, I don't think people understand how monumental of a collapse this was for the Clippers, the Suns, and the Bucks. I understand the Bucks mostly because of injury, even though I didn't think that the Bucks were good enough after, everything that we've seen. I didn't think they were good enough to win a championship. But there was so much high hopes for the Clippers for a lot of reasons. And now you're sitting at home watching the Dallas Mavericks advance. And shouts out to the Mavericks, man. I don't want to poo-poo on them. I don't want to say that it's just that it's just a Clippers failure. The Mavericks did their thing. Then you were getting help from a lot of areas, man. Again, Daniel Gafford. I'm sorry. It was, yeah. And the two best players of the series, the two most consistent players of the series, was Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. So I'm interested to see what happens with the Thunder. I think that the Dallas Mavericks have a really good shot of beating the Thunder. And I also think that the Thunder, they can, obviously being the number one seed, they can run with anybody. So, yeah, man, that's going to be an interesting series. And I understand that I'm not talking about game one because it hasn't happened. I'll talk about that or talk about what we've seen or what we will see moving forward in probably next episode. So, oh man, you stayed to the end of the video. I appreciate you. If you like what you saw, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss any content from your boy. You can also go back and watch past episodes, past clips, and don't forget that the Unpopular Podcast, new episodes drop every Wednesday and Saturday. Appreciate you.